We continue our latest installment of Issues in Education, a roundtable discussion with the leaders in education. It's been a lot of fun. We've been doing this now. Well, Robert would know. Robert Vogel is with us from Ittner. He's the Director of Business and Relationship Development. Are we pushing 2 years, Robert, at
We're
this point?
at a year and a half right now
half.
on Issues in Education, and this is our second time down at the MSBA Conference.
Yeah, the MSBA is why we're here. It's their annual conference, the Missouri School Boards Association, and their slogan is to connect, learn, engage. And, Robert, for you guys, I know at Ittner even, a lot of it is engagement and meeting with the school board members and some of the leaders.
Yeah, so much of it is engagement and making sure that we're addressing all of the needs of the school boards as well as the superintendents all throughout the state of Missouri. And so much of it, what we really do is optimize the human performance and experience of the students, of the teachers, of the staff, and that's really what they're talking about here at the conference for the next couple of days.
Yeah, and I know for our listeners, we change it up a little bit, but the idea is whether your kids are in school, your kids are out of school, you don't have any kids, it still has an effect on you, on your neighborhood, on your business.
That's absolutely right. And, we came down here, and 2 days prior to the start of this conference was the Safe Schools and Colleges Conference, and we were down here for that program as well. And, in fact, we presented, and we talked specifically about some of the action items that came out of the Safe Schools Symposium that we did back in January from our offices, and it was a really well-attended session, both sessions, standing room only, and it went well, and we've gotten a lot of questions and a lot of excitement about being back down here at MSBA because we want to put all the focus on the board members and all the good work that they do throughout their communities.
Hey, we have a new panel here. It's Patsy Carter, Missouri Department of Mental Health, also Amy Bledsoe, board member from Marys County, and John Warner, Emergency Planning Coordinator, Center for Education Safety, here with the MSBA. And let's talk about something that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot, and that's behavioral risk assessment. Before something bad happens, we always say the warning signs. Were there warning signs? And I know, Amy, you're a board member there. What's being discussed on your end in your county?
Well, I'm very excited to be a consultant for the Center for Education Safety, and for the past year we have been working on bringing a Missouri model of behavioral risk assessment to all of our schools in the state of Missouri. We focus on building a team comprised of an administrator, a teacher, a school counselor, social worker, or nurse, and the school resource officer or law enforcement officer. So we bring them in for a full-day training and teach them the evidence-based practice based on the SIGMA model, which is utilized in the state of Virginia. And that's exactly what it's about. We want to look for signs and in our students or our members of our community where they might be on the path to violence, and we want to mitigate that by providing resources to help avoid that.
But that's tricky, isn't it? Because you don't want to misidentify or label somebody. How do we delicately, and it's not just because we're in a PC world, but how do you gently kind of say, we're concerned about your son or daughter? Is there an easy way to go about that?
Easy?
No, okay, nothing's easy.
Probably not. So I came from the world of law enforcement. I was a school resource officer for 13 years. One of the things that I constantly had happen was teachers telling me about a specific kid and the behaviors that kid would show in the class that were concerning to them. Then I would go to that kid's other teachers and find that it wasn't just that one class. So it wasn't about that teacher, which is always what a teacher sort of, they internalize it. They say it's about what I'm doing in the class and what can I do to better help this kid. But we were finding that those kids were doing some of those same behaviors in other classes. So that starts to form that process of, so there's some issues going on with this kid that are beyond what the school traditionally can do. So can we coalesce around them and give them some ideas, talk with the families, pull the families into it too, because that's the key issue of connecting the schools and the families together. And it's that team approach that is able to do that. You've got your administration, you've got the teacher or teachers themselves. School resource officer, all I found that I was doing for the most part was being a conduit for that process. It's not about arrest or enforcement actions. It's about getting that kid what they need, and they don't always know what they need. So coalescing that team around them to try and manage that process.
You know, in the world today, they always tell us, see something, say something. But I think in high school, especially, kids are going to be, well, I don't want to get in trouble, and I don't want to be a snitch. I mean, how do you work around that?
Well, the way that most states are doing it, and Missouri, we're working toward this process, is to have an anonymous way for kids to send information out. And it's, quite frankly, in the world today, it's going to be a text or a social media process for that. They're not going to call on the phone, and they're unlikely to come to you directly or in person unless they know you specifically. That's, again, one of the reasons why having those bridge building processes, having a school resource officer who gets in with the kids, and it's not just an enforcement issue, it's a school climate and culture issue that you want to have. But kids, they don't want to say in person, but they will text. They will send anonymous text to give you information, because anytime an incident is about to occur, any of the dangerous incidents that we've seen around the country, they always talk to somebody, and the somebody that they always talk to are peers. Now, they sometimes talk with clergy and teachers and other staff members, things like that, but they always talk to peers. And if we can get those peers to understand that the things that they hear are concerning to us, not just in an enforcement or a getting the kid in trouble process, but we need to get them some help. We need to find some way to buoy that kid up so that a dangerous issue is not in the offing. And we can do that. We can do a lot of that by working before the incident occurs.
And there's no guarantee that anything will prevent something, but we still have an obligation, everybody does, to do the most that we can. Patsy, I'm curious, from your position with the Missouri Department of Mental Health, how tough is it for teachers, administrators who aren't trained mental health experts to kind of know the signs or to engage?
That's always an issue that's brought to our attention from teachers and school administrators. And one of the things that we're doing in response to that is recognizing that many of the students have significant histories of trauma. And that puts them at risk, both in not being able to learn and to not be able to regulate their emotions or their behaviors. So we have many schools across the state now that are joining together in collaboratives to become trauma-informed schools, which basically means that that whole school understands the prevalence and impact of trauma, understands the recovery pathways to heal from that trauma, and that they take that information and integrate it into their practices, their policies, and their environment, and then try to avoid re-traumatizing. So it's making it a very safe place for these students to be able to learn. And with that, in conjunction with what others were saying, it's about that relationship, that we need to have the students and the school staff having strong relationships where they feel safe, because they may not feel safe anywhere else, whether they're living in a violent neighborhood or a home where there's poverty or violence, or the kids have experienced tornadoes and flooding, which all impacts their brain development, which then impacts their ability to learn, as well as their behavioral and emotional
So
control.
What's appropriate if you're a teacher, administrator, and you think, boy, that kid looks, like might be dealing with something. How do you not get sued in this world? I mean, how do you approach that? What's your advice even to the school folks about how to deal with it?
Well, it's not easy, and it's not something that you can just automatically do, because it does depend upon having that relationship. One of the first steps that we say to any organization trying to become trauma-informed, because this goes across not only education, child welfare, juvenile justice, et cetera, is to kind of shift your view from what's wrong with that child, which is what we typically do. We immediately say they're aggressive or they're using drugs or what's wrong with them, and really start thinking about what has happened to them and understanding how that changes their perception of authority and their ability to learn, again, as I had mentioned, as well as their ability to control their behaviors.
And I know even, Robert, from your end at Ittner, just the whole safety issue has maybe in the last 10 years changed dramatically to what you guys are doing.
Well, things have changed dramatically over the past decade with active shooter situations that unfortunately have taken place and happen all too often throughout the country. And earlier this week, while we were in the middle of one of our presentations, we had the shooting at South Carolina. So it's a shame that it happens, but it is the reality. And one of the things that we communicate to everybody is that it can happen anywhere, anytime. And one of our speakers during the session, one of the panelists, was Dr. Jim Simpson from Lindbergh, who had previously been on down at Joplin as superintendent, and he talked about handling an active shooter situation down there just over a decade ago, and they went from a very small budget to a very large budget overnight just for safety and security because, of course, parents are concerned about what's going to happen. But to come back to what we're discussing here today, of course, anything you can do to try to identify potential problems in advance, not just for active shooters, but for anything along those lines is just absolutely critical. And so many of the things that we do are along the lines of how do we help teachers and staff from a design standpoint so that they're comfortable in the school, because we all know, as it was said earlier, that you're not going to learn if you're not comfortable and you don't feel safe in that environment.
And Amy, as a school board member, what do you hear from parents? I mean, there are a lot of issues that they want to address. Has this become a bigger issue?
It does. It is an issue in every district, and every time in our 24/7 media cycle that we see an event has occurred, a tragedy somewhere, it does bring it to the forefront. And you know, it's important that every school have a crisis plan that covers all types of crises, including something like an active shooter or an intruder. And like the other panelists have alluded to, you know, we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs from Psychology 101, and we know that we have to meet those basic needs of all of our students and for them to be safe before they can learn. And for that matter, for our teachers to teach, they need to also feel safe. So it's, you know, we have talked about districts can adopt a policy, they can write a policy to include this. They can also fold the behavioral risk assessment into their crisis plan. One thing as school board members and administrators, budget is always an issue. So our behavioral risk assessment training through the Missouri Center for Education Safety is extremely low cost, and the team can be trained up and immediately walk away ready to implement it with everything they need the next day.
How do we all get on the same page? And Amy, I think you said a word during the break, collaboration is key.
It absolutely is. And when we talk about collaboration, we're not talking only about the team members for each school building in each district. We're talking about the school community as a whole, all of the teachers, all of the faculty and staff. We need to build relationship with our students and with the families of our students. Also, that goes out into our houses of worship, our faith-based community, mental health agencies, private practices, law enforcement, and, you know, just everybody in the community. We want to be able to know that whenever our student has a need, we can go and find a place to have that need fulfilled.
And what do you do with the kids that don't come forward or aren't obvious? And I know, John, you're sort of the security expert. And how, I mean, for lack of a better term, right? But how do you identify? Are there warning signs? Are teachers being educated now before they even get in front of the kids on what to look for?
Well, and that's exactly what Amy's trying to do, is bring those teams together so that the teachers who connect to those teams in the schools can then know what is it that I need to look for. You know, one of the things that we talked about in the first segment was safety at the schools. I can tell you that most kids, the vast majority, feel very safe at their schools, and the example of that I can give is a kid who runs away from home will come to school. Many, many times as a school resource officer, we solved our runaway cases by just looking for them at school, because that's where they'll come to, because they feel a sense of safety. No matter what else is going on in their lives, it's a touchstone. It's something that's absolutely rock solid for them, that they know those people in that school district and in that school building care for them and will keep them safe. We need to follow that thought process that the kids have up with the actual action for that too, and show them that not only when you have an issue at home, you can come to us and we can help you with that process, whether it's a home issue, whether it's homelessness, whether it's food on the table, whether it's, you know, an unsafe neighborhood, whatever it is, there are resources out there. And kids don't always see that. Kids rarely see that, quite frankly. They don't look beyond their own little world. We have to be the ones who show them that we've got those processes in place, that we've got those resources in place for them, because a school can't have all of the resources. They have to reach out to other areas in their communities. Knowing what those areas are is sometimes the trick. is who is it that is in our community that can help? Is it a faith-based? Are there some organizations that what they do is this process that maybe we don't know so much about? I discovered as a school resource officer, we had an organization in town that was cataloging homelessness. They were, and some of those were our kids. There was no other agency, no other entity that we could connect with that was doing as much as this nonprofit organization was doing in terms of connecting with the homeless populations. It's big in districts.
And
they
Pat,
need to have that information.
And Patsy, I'm wondering too, the Department of Mental Health, are they reaching out to schools too, so that because the teachers don't always know? They're not mental health experts; they're educators.
Right.
So, is there from your department too trying to get into the schools and educate the educators?
Yes, we're always trying to find ways to bring more services into the schools, or at least have them linked to the schools, so that there's a strong partnership between mental health providers and the schools. And again, in a trauma-informed school, we're trying to understand those needs of those children that have the most serious reactions to their trauma, so that they can get the services they need and evidence-based practices around trauma. But simultaneously, we want to support the teachers themselves, because not only are the children feeling stressed and experiencing trauma, but the staff are. The turnover rate in teachers, quality teachers, is way too high because they don't feel like they have the tools to meet the needs of children. So we want to put those tools in the teachers' hands, because that's a natural environment for the student. And as was stated, it can be a safe place for them to go. Whereas sometimes if we label them too quickly with mental health issues, that's a label that follows them. It can, again, impact their self-image and their self-esteem. So we want to make it a very collaborative approach, with schools working hand in hand, bringing therapy, but also supporting the teachers.
And we talked a lot about school resource officers, and for our listeners who kids have been out of school for a long time, don't have kids, they may not even understand what that is, but I've seen it in practice. I was out to eat with my nieces and nephews, and they ran over there talking to a police officer, and I thought, oh my God, they're getting in trouble. What did they do? And I went over, they go, oh, no, she's at our school. She's at our school. And I think, oh, it's a Kirkwood police officer. No, they all knew her and were friendly, and this is outside of school. They go running over, so clearly there was a relationship there. Does every public school have an on-site police officer?
Absolutely not. It's not as rare as it used to be, but we know that districts need that officer in there, and sometimes the department can't provide it because of budget constraints. Sometimes what we see works about the best is when school districts and their police agencies can get together, whether that's a city agency or whether it's a sheriff's department, to provide some funding from the school district toward having that officer in the building, because it's a large burden for a police department to draw one or two or three of its officers out of its regular contingency of officers that are throughout the city, because they're 24 hours a day. It's a 24-hour a day process, and you got to have enough people to fill those spaces. And to take one or two of them out to put them in schools for those periods of time is sometimes more than most police agencies can.
So who pays for it? Do they split the cost? It always goes back to funding. Every roundtable we've had always goes back to funding. But how does that work?
It's usually a split the cost process. There are some districts that pay for it fully to their police departments. They pay that officer's salary directly to the police department. They're still a police officer. They're still commissioned by that police agency. They're still trained by that agency, because training becomes a big issue, because, with the big L word, liability issues, you always have to have the proper amount of training for everything that you do, whether it's within the school or outside of the school. And so the police agency will usually take on that training process, but ask for some assistance with getting the salaries met for that officers, so that they can also put enough officers on the street to deal with the rest of the population that they have to deal with too.
I will add to that. In our very small school district, pre-K through 12, we have less than 800 students.
And I mentioned Marys County. For people who don't know, you're in between.
We're located off the beaten path between Rolla and Jefferson City, Missouri. Marys County, R2, and Bell and Bland. We have our students come from 3 counties, Osage, Marys, and Gasconade. Our school building campuses are located in Bell and also in Bland. The city of Bland no longer has city police department, so they rely on the Gasconade County Sheriff's Department. In Bell, we're fortunate that we have city police, and our officers show up at the beginning of school and at the end of school, and not only are our city police, but also our county sheriff's departments and the Missouri State Highway Patrol. And the Missouri State Highway Patrol has this new initiative where they're allowing their officers time to go into the school districts just simply to get to know everybody, because we're working on improving that, reducing that stigma and improving that relationship between law enforcement and our communities. And one of the best ways to do that is get to down there at the children's level and to let our children know that law enforcement officers are here to protect us and they are our friends. So in our district, we are very pleased, as many other districts are, that we invite them in. As a school board member, I am more than happy to pay for their breakfast or lunch or whatever. We invite them for special events, and they just randomly come and do walkthroughs through our building. And that helps to, again, to reduce that stigma and improve that relationship.
How'd you get on the school board? Our guest last hour from Springfield said it's one of the hardest or painful processes to go through. Then when you're there, he said it's rewarding.
It is very rewarding. You know, people always told me being a school board member, of course, it doesn't pay and there is a lot of work involved, but it is very rewarding. I have 4 children. All 4 were in our school district whenever I ran for school board the first time.
I'm sure they're like, Mom, could you just shorten the day a little bit? You're on the school board. Maybe we could get out a little earlier on Fridays.
Well, actually, yes.
I'm sure you've heard that before.
That comes up. And our youngest child, who is now a 7th grader, actually came home and was lobbying me on behalf of our principal and staff to increase the length of spring break.
There you go. And about lunch, Mom, we need to know. Well, thank you, panel. It's been a fun discussion. Next is going to be on STEM and technology. But John Warner, Amy Bledsoe, Patsy Carter, Robert Vogel, thanks to all of them for our discussion on behavioral risk assessment and safety within our schools. It's the Issues in Education Roundtable. We will come back and talk about STEM and technology within the schools. We are here at the annual conference for MSBA, the Missouri School Boards Association.